Hello. My name is Martin Schmock, and I will try to do a brief introduction explaining why there is three of us, why there is not just a single person. It's because we will try to present something that's so multifaceted that one person wouldn't be able to speak knowledgeably about everything that should be spoken about. So I'm here to start with telling you what it is that you should hear about and learn about today. It's the what. Why are we here? What are we talking about? Why is it of any importance with relevance for today? Where we want to do what we will be talking about? When? And how? The how will fall on me at the end of today's presentation. It should introduce you in very basic terms to the context of Jewish Moravia, starting with knowledge of where Moravia is and what it is, ending with today and the relevance of places that are not the capital cities of countries for the development of public understanding of certain phenomena on a local level that's much better than constantly talking just about the capital and the events in the capital, which in the situation of the Czech Republic is constantly talking about people connected with Prague and events that happened in Prague, and everything is just about Prague. I also would like to thank the consulate and Mr. Kareš personally, the Society for the History of Czechoslovak Jews and the BBLA for allowing us to have this beautiful space and for organizing the outreach that clearly reached the perfect people because you came. The illustration that is being used here is an illustration of a history that always was quite complex and often gets misinterpreted and is being shared out of context. The document on the left is a receipt. It's a receipt of payment of the Jewish protection tax for 19 families permitted to live in the city of Veselí na Moravě, and the payment was made in advance for the month of August on 30th July 1811. It's one of the objects that will be presented by the educational and probably also the generic exhibitional activities of the museum that will be attempting to capture the very complex role that Jewish Moravia played in the history of Central European Jews, but actually also in the history of Jews in the Middle East, history of Jews in Northern America, Southern America, Australia, and a little bit of Asia. Without getting into more detail, I will hand the floor to Tanya, who, unlike me, I'm from Prague, is really from Moravia.
Well, I'm sorry, I came from Luxembourg, but I stayed there just for a couple of years. And thank you, Martin, for introduction. When we try to turn our attention to the topic of Moravia, we can help with this map coming from 18th century, which shows us the region of Moravia. In those times, there were 52 Jewish communities, mostly in small towns, not in the royal towns, such as Brno, where I was born, but more in the tiny towns, such as Boskovice, Holešov, Prostějov, Třebíč, Třešť, etc. Moravia got its name after the principal river, called Morava. And in German language, we call the region Mehrin, in Latin Moravia, and in Hebrew, medieval Hebrew, Mehrin. That's why we call the museum Mehrin, or Medinat Mehrin. Moravia is one of the three parts of the Czech kingdom. So there is also Bohemia, but its Jewish past is slightly different to the Jewish past of Moravia. And the third part of the Czech kingdom is in the north, Silesia. So our museum should deal with Moravia and Silesia together. We can also help with another map, and this geographical lesson won't be so long, don't worry. So here we see Moravia here, also accompanied by Bohemia, Silesia, and Lutetia in the north. Maybe this map will be more helpful to a wider context for us. So here we can locate Moravia here, and that will maybe help us to understand why this pretty small region was a shelter for Jewish families from neighboring countries, these, and also Austria, between 15th and 18th century. It was a place of refuge for many Jewish families escaping from neighboring countries, but in half of 18th centuries it changed, and Moravia started produce their Jews abroad because of restrictions which were on residence, occupation, marriage, and later in the half of 19th century, a bit ironically, the reason why Jewish families fled from Moravia was the freedom as a result of emancipation. So that is about the past. And this is the last map showing Czechoslovakia. So here we find Moravia together with Silesia here. And that's probably the last map, which can also be abound with your own stories and with stories of your families. When we try to find some face which we can fit with the topic of Jewish Moravia, it could be surprisingly this one. It's the second most known Jewish Czech person abroad, Franz Kafka. What does he has in common with Moravia? Because he's a native Prague, yes, but he spent a lot of time in Třešť, where was his favorite uncle, a doctor, Siegfried Löw. And he also wrote a story about this life in Třešť. And when he was dating Dora Diamant, one of the places they thought they might live in was Brno, the capital of Moravia. Another phase could be Gustav Mahler, who was raised in Jihlava. Maybe he's the third most known Czech abroad, or this one, who is the first most known Czech abroad, Sigmund Freud, born in Příbor, a really tiny city or village, it's a city, in Moravia, the father of psychoanalysis. But how can their stories help us to understand the topic of Jewish Moravia? They had some Jewish Moravian roots, okay, which shaped them, which influenced them. But what they have in common more is in their lives that they left Moravia behind and they became famous somewhere else, in Vienna, in Prague, etc. So who we are more interested in are people who are not well known, such as this woman, the second one, the third one, people, men and women, men and women who are unknown for the public, who can tell us their stories more about the Jewish past in Moravia and Silesia than the stories of the so famous persons. So we would love to focus more on these stories than the famous ones. Another clue which helps us to understand how the Jewish Moravia is everywhere in the world now are the family names which are related to the places in Moravia. So even now you can meet people who are called Třebič, Náš, Brunner, Eibenschütz, Austerlitz, Třeč, Myslitz, Prosnitz, Byzance, or Pulitzer, and all of the names are related to Jewish communities coming from Moravia. Maybe this face is familiar to you. It's, I don't know his position in the world famous Czech top 10, but it's Jakov Edelstein, very important Zionist and one of the elders of Theresienstadt. And his Moravian chapter was lasting 15 years. He came from Galicia to Moravia with his family, but these 15 years are completely unknown. Although we know a lot of this person, a lot of his life in Prague and in Theresienstadt, we do not know what he did in a refugee camp in Pohřelice or in Brno, where he studied a high school. So he came to Moravia in 1915. Yeah, here is where Pohřelice is mentioned. And it's one of the topic, it's one of the blank spaces we can fill in, and we should, because he deserves it, of course. And there are other interesting Moravian stories with some surprising results, such as the story of Jonathan ben Natan Eibenschütz, a famous rabbi, Talmudist, halachist, who was suspected of being Sabbatanist, a follower of Shabtai Tzvi, the person who finally converted to Islam. There is a story of Theodor Kohn, Archbishop of Olmütz, at the end of 19th century, who had a Jewish origin as well. And we also will probably describe a story later in the museum of Joe Allen. That's a national hero of Israel. He was an Israel Air Force officer, but his roots are in Moravia. His name before he left to Israel was Joseph Plaček. Maybe you know his story because he was killed in US. And one more face, John Kerry, whose paternal grandfather was from Silesia. He was a brewer, and he changed his name from Kohn to Kerry in 1902. In 1905, they left to US. So this is another pretty interesting story for us. And I give the word back to Martin.
Thank you very much. Education is what I do. I do a little bit of research, digging up things that could help shatter the stereotypes. and then I try to use the information that's at least in some way novel and interesting and exciting to push the Czech and global public into thinking about the Jews a little bit differently. I shall be in charge of the educational activities of the Mehrin Museum, but at the same time maybe sharing some of the things that we already did will help you better understand the Moravian soul, which was always torn between Poland and Galicia and Russia in the north, the Hungarian Empire, or the Hungarian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire to the east, Austria to the south, and Bohemia in Germany to the west. The very basis of most of the problems faced when educating about the Jews is the fact that people keep imagining a lot of strange things. Even in the Czech Republic, which is regarded as a very progressive country with very low levels of anti-Semitism, people often imagine really strange, stereotypical figurines when they think about the Jews. And encountering somebody who looks like them, behaves like a normal person, and says, I'm a Jew, can sometimes be shocking even to teachers of history or civic education. The quote pretty much explains one of the roots of hatred of the Jews, which is the cultural construct of otherness that has been used for, 2,000 years. And is still the primary construct of the other in most of Central Europe, with the other constructs of the other being the Roma, the Gypsies, and the Turks, the Muslims. How to deal with this tradition? As you heard in my introduction, I have this educational institution, and I try to work with the collection of interviews that was collected worldwide in mid-1990s by an institution that today is called USC Shaw Foundation. Why? Because presenting Jews as people is the key. When we are talking about presenting Jewish Moravia of the past, of the present, and of the future, more than the maps, we want to talk about people. Because it's individual people that only when they are combined and their life stories are combined make the big history that we learn and read about. So I believe in deconstructing the abstract, often stereotype-filled group visions into individual human beings that have their own face, their own voice, their own experience, and each one is different. That, I believe, is the key. What are the stereotypes? I already hinted a little bit at the negative stereotypes, which are not that much different in Moravia from other places in the world. Moravia being a little bit more traditional than Bohemia, the residual Catholic construct of Jews as Christ killers tends to be sometimes quite strong. But I will speak about stereotypes that appear on the positive side when they are being recycled without realizing that they are just stereotypes, and that focusing education efforts that are based on stereotypes as your mainstream education about Jewish presence may not be the best avenue to take. When you come to Brno today and you want to learn about its Jewish population, you are offered a visit to amazing places, villas of the local Jewish millionaires. There are many villas, and they're gradually being reconstructed by the city, and in most of them, some kind of Jewish something is being created as a content. And I'm not going into the details of what I think about some of that content. Where I see a problem, and what we are about to try not to do, is following only the life stories of the rich and extremely successful, presenting those tales as Jewish presence in Moravia or in Brno, because only a tiny minority were rich and successful. The majority were, in Brno even more so than in Prague, dirt poor. Migrants, illegal migrants sometimes, from Poland, from Galicia, from Russian Poland, who came in and lived in a poor neighborhood on the other side of the railway tracks, which I hear is something you may encounter even in America, that there is the proper side of the railway tracks and then the other side of the railway tracks. So what we should try to use in order to shatter all those stereotypes are individual human stories like this one.
My mother had, at the beginning, we were 3 children with the first husband that she married, and the age was always about 2 years apart. So my brother would be born in 1920, I was born in 1922, and my sister, the youngest at that time, was born in 1924. It was very hard because we didn't have any income. There was no father. When the father was around, I know there was no income either. He was a shoemaker, and the way I heard it later from my mother, he was a gambler. He liked to play dominoes. Instead of repairing shoes, he was wasting the money playing dominoes in the coffee house somewhere. So we had a hard time. We were always very poor and mostly dependent on the Jewish community center, They called it the Kultusgemeinde. They helped us out by giving us some clothes, and they had a soup kitchen every day, and like this we survived.
Did your mother remarry?
She remarried a few years later, and then changed her name to Hersmanova, which is a Czech name, and she had 2 more children. After she married, later it found out that he was an alcoholic, so it didn't do no good. One way or the other, he was no good. He was not a good husband, he was not a good provider. He didn't have a job, really. He was selling some paintings from from different Czech painters on commission or so. But whatever he sold, if my mother didn't go after him, the money never ended up in her pocket. He just spent it on alcohol. He was an alcoholic, and with her rough time, because he was cruel in a way. Once he drinks, he forgets himself. But otherwise, it was not a very good childhood. It hindered me in my schooling. I couldn't even buy a pencil, so that was very hard.
Did you celebrate any holidays at home?
We celebrated whenever we had something to eat. Was a celebration.
Any of the Jewish holidays?
Yom Kippur we didn't have to celebrate because we celebrated most of the year anyway. And Hanukkah, that was to the community, yes. Because I belong to the Jewish community all the time, to the clubs, Maccabi, and they call it Techeret Lavan, blue rice, and Hechalutz, you see. So I belonged always to them, the sports and that. So as I belonged to them, again we had our place to go to, for the afternoons after school. So I was never really lonely because I was with my friends together, always, always.
You may have noticed that not only is this piece of testimony quite different from what you normally hear or see, it also has a potential for us to have a 3-hour workshop just analyzing what the statements mean. Because it's a very human story. Again, for America, with the railway tracks and the proper sites and the improper sites, having a safe space where youth could go and be among its peers without the pressure of the adults with their strange adult ideas, here being Zionist youth groups, is a very important moment that's not really about the Jews, but it's about kids from underprivileged families living in very underprivileged conditions. So there are lessons to learn that go way beyond some Jewish topics. The other stereotype you can see when visiting Moravia is almost every city or village has an ancient synagogue or two. Is this Jewish presence in Moravia? And again, looking at the synagogues and the places which are gradually being restored in a very sanitized way for my taste, they are being restored into their Baroque state, not to the last state when the Jews used them, because most of those ancient synagogues were actually modernized throughout the centuries. They didn't look so nicely medieval when their last members were murdered. In some of the places there were even new synagogues built which were destroyed by the locals during the war. And the obsession with the ancient synagogues develops another stereotype of the Jews being something very ancient that existed only in the past and occurred in Baroque buildings 300, 400 years ago. Often visitors of programs in those synagogues misunderstand also the relationship of Jews and people labeled as Jews to Judaism and the practice of all the traditions and prescriptions of Jewish life, which again wasn't what is often being presented in the exhibitions in those synagogues. This is what the Jews used to do, all of them, and this is how they did it, all of them. And again, we can use personalized memories to shatter at least some of that and bring a little bit of human connection to exploring Jewish presence in Moravia.
I never kissed my father, only on his hand. Religious fanatics. My mother, I had a very good relationship with my father too. But she adored him, and whatever he said was a law.
So you said your father was a shoichet?
Yes, a shoichet, a meshgiach, and a cantor. This was like that. Brno had a reform, a conservative, a Stiebel, Polish Jews mostly, and then another Orthodox like for mine. But they were still not good enough for certain Jews who came, even who lived there in Brno. So they formed a new synagogue. It wasn't a synagogue, it was a Stiebel, a big apartment and this where my father did all this. He was a pretty educated man, but he was a fanatic.
What did he look like?
He was handsome, very handsome. He wore a beard and pious. In Saturday, a Stramel. I remember everything. The high holidays, I remember when he prayed, davened. Every hour he had to change his shirt because it was soaked. It was a hard job. In Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, I never went to the synagogue, only for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. but not the whole day, no.
He must-
I mean, girls didn't have to go. A girl doesn't have to know too much. A girl has to get married. If he would have an oven for me, but he would never have an oven for me.
So what were you studying? What did you want to pursue?
I didn't know yet. I didn't know really. I just swallowed everything what was, I was very, curious about everything.
You wanted to learn.
Yes. I learned German immediately because this city, you had to know. We had in school German. We had French, we had German. And later we had Latin, you say, for nothing. There I started to eat reifer. Yes, because the kids from these Jewish families didn't have kosher. They had ham sandwiches, and this is what was in Brno. It wasn't like, they were Orthodox, but the main rabbi from Brno drove on Yom Kippur a car to the synagogue, and it was a big synagogue. It was something terrific.
Do you think your parents would have approved of the marriage?
Never. He was a shayget to them. No, my father knew I dated him. Whenever I went out, because I didn't hide anymore. Before, when I used to go out dancing, I never knew, they never knew. But when I had Herman, I never hid it. I told them.
But he wouldn't have been religious enough for your father?
Nothing. He was an apocoirus. He was nothing. What he was. He wasn't raised religious. He knew everything religious. After bar mitzvah, he didn't touch nothing. There are a lot such families, no?
It's my wife, Cecily.
This is Herman, my beloved husband, and I wish I had him for a long, long time together to me.
So again, a little bit unconventional testimony, but you probably felt on yourself that it actually works. And it works even on Czech kids who don't understand half of the terms that she's using, because it's human story. It's not what they imagine is a Jewish story, it's a human story of a girl who grew up in a strict home and settled into the wider Moravian society, broke all the rules by getting educated, and then started dating Herman Koričoner, whose family name, of course, relates to the city, or I would call it village in Moravia, they would call it city, of Koričany. Many people who never heard anything about the Jews but the stereotypes actually can relate to stories like this, because they themselves or their families went through something like this. Maybe not necessarily about keeping kosher, but about keeping something else that the adults required and insisted on. So again, it's making the history of Jewish presence a human story. The other thing that we would like to focus on, because it's often completely omitted by the narrative that basically ends with the Second World War, and then all the Jews were killed and they're gone. They were not gone. Walter, who was the first witness, clips of whose testimony you saw today, was one of the 12 people who survived from the Brno transport to the Minsk ghetto. 12 people out of 1,000 people survived. He was one of them. The ones out of those 12 that returned to Brno had to live through a new wave of anti-Jewish political state-sponsored hatred in the 1950s, where the racist construct of Nazi Germany was replaced with the Russian communist construct of a Zionist. A Zionist, of course, was defined by the Nazi Nuremberg laws, not by politics. Any person of Jewish origin or married to such a person or friendly with such people could be labeled a Zionist, a traitor of the nation, a secret conspirator against socialism, and the path to progress. The gates of anti-Jewish hatred were opened by the so-called Slansky trial that you surely know about in November 1952, and this is the cover page of the humoristic magazine that is mocking them Jews and conspirators with their American money being crushed by a, and he's not an Aryan in the communist and Russian construct, he is a worker. Because in the Russian and communist construct, the genocidal push is not racist, it's a class war. So it's only those who oppose the workers of the world who should unite, should be liquidated. The snakes are the Jews who were silly enough to be members of the Communist Party and rose to the top ranks and were executed for a conspiracy they never did, as opposed to being tried for the murders that they did as leaders of the Communist Party. But we don't have time for that. What I wanted to get to is a trial of one of the 12 Minsk ghetto survivors who was tried for Zionist conspiracy because he was distributing social assistance money to Holocaust survivors. In the Terezin ghetto, for reasons that you probably know very well, upon liberation, the majority of the population were children and extremely elderly people. Everybody in between was murdered. So there was this huge population of extremely old survivors who didn't have any families, any relatives, didn't want to go anywhere, and just stayed. There was a program of social assistance which was labeled as promoting Zionism, and everybody involved in it was arrested and tried for grand treason because every Jew is a Zionist and every Zionist is an American spy. Mr. Herzog actually wasn't executed. He was only sentenced, I believe, to 12 years. He was let out from the prison after a few years, but he couldn't bear it and he hung himself in Brno on the Nakolišti Street, number 57. And it continued. The other quotes are from 1970s and 1980s. Basically, every time there was a war in the Middle East, the construct of the Zionist enemy came out using Nazi phrases with the word Jew being replaced with the word Zionist, culminating in the claim that the Zionists co-organized the Holocaust because they are really Nazis, so the Holocaust was done by the Zionists. This is state interpretation of the Holocaust, Czechoslovakia, 1985. And with it came the destruction of Jewish monuments. I have just 2 images from Moravia. I will not bother you with more. I chose those 2 because they're both from 1988. A year before the fall of communism, the Baroque synagogue in Brtnice was demolished to make space for, let's call it a supermarket. And this is the new synagogue in Brno, which was hit by American bombs at the very end of the war, but it stood there until 1988, when it was demolished to make space for a new wing of a hospital, which said wing was never built. So there is a parking lot where the synagogue stood. 1988. One of the things that we are trying to do is, and you probably noticed it, is to connect the past with the present by the authentic locations where things happened. There is an application that's combining filmed testimonies with authentic locations, mostly in Europe, and OpenEye, the educational institution I run, is creating the Czech content, which is in Czech and English. And actually, you don't have to be on location to experience it. You can play it in New York as well, but of course, it's better if you would be on location. There are iVox that are being used by the schools, 2 for Brno, 1 for Ostrava, 1 for Přívoz near Ostrava, 1 for Uherský Brod, and 1 for Český Těšín. It's, I think, quite fascinating. And all of this said, I should stop talking and I should hand the mic over to the founding father of Mehrin, Moravian Jewish Museum, whose name is also Martin, and this is him.
Good evening. Yeah, I'm a proud director of non-existing museum. Yet what you can see on the picture here is the winning design of a building to be the next Moravian Jewish Museum. It is supposed to be kind of a completion of the whole project that has started 5 years ago in the spring of 2019. And of course, many things happened since then, but one of the most important ones was the signing of a memorandum of cooperation with the Brno City Hall, through which we acquired this needed piece of land where the next museum will stand. Yeah, in the course of 2022, we organized and completed the international architectural competition, in which real masters of the world architecture took part. In particular, there were Dutch MVRDV, the Danish Bjarke Ingels group, who, by the way, won recently a great competition for the next Prague Philharmonic building, the Italian architect Chinotsuki, and the Japanese one, Kengo Kuma, with the associates. Kengo Kuma won the competition, and one of the main reasons why he did so was that he best met the requirement to design an open and public-friendly building. Let me put it straight. We don't want to build a museum of Holocaust. We don't want to open the House of Terror. We know well how important it is to recommend all the horrible things that has happened during the World War II, but we also would like to see the lighter side of history, which is very important because there are a lot of very important things, and there is a significant role of Moravian Jews over the long centuries. We think that this is the only way how to truly realize the extent and the magnitude of the loss we suffered. So here you can see the entrance of the next building, and let me also say that the museum is not going to be comprised only of the museum itself. It wouldn't be work. It wouldn't be way. How could it work nowadays? Not economically, not even mentally. So there will be in the building also a Jewish library. There will be the exhibition hall for temporary exhibits, some lecture hall, probably combined with some screening hall, the educational center for the youngest generation, and the stylish cafe, of course, it's necessary. And what you also can see on the pictures here is I can use it is the jury assessing the proposals, and here you can see Mr. Karel Ellinger, who went through 6 concentration camps and who was a great supporter of the project. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of months ago in the age of 94. What the next picture? Yeah. This picture recommends me that I have to say that I cannot stress enough that the museum is not going to be primarily about the form of the building, let's say about the facade. I mean, the face of the museum is a very important thing, because this is the first thing you see, and even in the means of the communication to public, it's important. But probably more important is the content of the museum. I don't mean the content of the building that I mentioned. I mean content of the exhibition. And as we know it, we addressed many Czech and world historians and the experts in several other fields. We asked them to cooperate, and we also established the International Advisory Board that is comprised from quite a significant personalities like American historian Michael Lawrence Miller, who is the author of an amazing book about the Moravian Jewry in the age of emancipants that was translated into Czech. There is another American historian, Benjamin Frommer, or, for instance, the director of a Jewish Museum in Berlin, Hettiberg, who you can see here in the course of the international conference that we organized 2021. Little Mehrin, yeah. That's something that we opened the last year, the March 1st, and it's a temporary space where we have been organizing the public debates and the lectures, and also a couple of groundbreaking exhibitions. The last one has a name, Our Houses, and was dedicated to the Arabization of Jewish property in Brno, and it deservedly gained a great attention of the general public in Brno, as there are thousands of people living in the houses that have been stolen and never given back to the Jewish owners. Yeah, the most recent achievement we have done is the opening of this new core, partly three-dimensional exposition at the Little Mehrin. And it's open just for a couple of weeks, and it's very important for us from at least 2 reasons. One of them is that we could demonstrate quite a new level of cooperation with the Jewish Museum. It's in Prague, which is a crucial cooperation for us, and it's based on the memorandum of cooperation that we signed last September with the new director, Pavla Nikolova. Sorry, Pavla Nikolova. And a second reason is that we could test some new technologies covering the Moravian experience and showing some new archival discoveries. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Last but not least, we established the Mehrin Patronage Club, who should enable the people interested in the project to become closely involved to get the more information and possibly support the project in a way they decide to. So we invite you all into the club. And before I let you hear a short message from the Professor Jiří Hála, one of the last Brno's Holocaust survivors, let me repeat one short sentence from his message. And it sounds, this project deserves your attention and your support. And we all, the people behind the project, work hard in trying to make the dream come true. And I can tell you we won't stop it. So here is Jiří Hála.
Já jako člověk, který jako malé dítě prožil 3,5 roku věznění v koncentračním táboře Terezín, si toho projektu Moravského židovského muzea velice vážím a cením si toho. A jsem rád, že jsem prostřednictvím mecenášského klubu mohl přispět k jeho uskutečnění. A byl bych velmi rád, kdybych viděl, že se k tomu klubu připojí ještě víc lidí.
So, I think there is something like thank you for your attention. I once more, or back? Oh, here we go. So,